I'm going to be speaking on this mic because my husband is recording the event. And so I would like to begin with prayer. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Dear God, we thank you and we praise you for our lives, for the gifts that you've bestowed upon us, and for the beautiful gift of our church. We ask you to please be with us today. We welcome the Holy Spirit to open our hearts and our minds to listen and to receive the message that you want us to hear. And we ask this with the intercession of our Blessed Mother Mary, in the name of Jesus. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. And so I am going to introduce our speaker, our guest speaker. So Colin received his PhD in theology from the Duke University in 2010 under Stanley Huertas, having previously studied at Yale and the University of Minnesota. He has taught at various universities, usually as an adjunct, but most recently as assistant professor of Catholic theology at De La Salle University in Pennsylvania. He stays active academically by occasionally publishing in journals such as Communio and New Polity, and recently published a book about Catholic worker movement and Christian community for Ave Maria Press. A former Episcopal priest, Colin converted to Catholicism in 2016 under the influence of John Henry Newman, Dorothy Day, Peter Marine, and life in a Catholic worker house. He has been on staff at the Church of Assumption since 2019 and lives with his wife and 5 children in Columbia Heights at the Maureen House Catholic Worker Community. Please welcome Colin Miller.
Thank you, Mirla. Hello, everybody. Some of you I know, some of you I have seen before, and I don't remember your names. Yes, I'm a native Minnesotan. Friendly Fridley is my home, and so I love it around here. I was 15 years in North Carolina, where I thought was the new home until about 7 years ago. My wife and I started to have children. We were new converts to Catholicism around 2016, and then a couple of years later we moved back here as we started to have kids and wanted to be around parents. The talk today is going to be a chapter from the book, We Are Only Saved Together, which is sort of an introduction to the Catholic worker movement. And I'll say a little bit more about that in just a minute. I got into or found out about the Catholic worker movement as I sort of say in the book, when I ran into the problem, which was a wonderful problem to have, of going to morning prayer and evening prayer at a little Episcopal church back when I was still an Episcopalian in Durham, North Carolina, and ran into a bunch of homeless people who lived on the property, and then commenced a number of years of figuring out what my commitment to the church and to the Christian gospel meant for my relationship with those people and for what it meant for the rest of my life. And so as I tell a little bit in the book, I'm giving you the short version. You can get the longer version in the book. I went to the library, as any good graduate student at Duke University would do, and typed in homeless people in the card catalog, and up came Dorothy Day and Peter Marne and the Catholic worker movement, not too far from the top of the list. And so I dug into their stuff and devoured that, and one thing led to another, and with lots of baby steps in between, started to get to know the folks at the church, and started building relationships with them. And after 2 or 3 years, ended up starting a hospitality house for the poor, which is one of the hallmarks of the Catholic worker movement, and living in the house for a number of years until my conversion and move up here. I was an Episcopal priest at that time, and so the rhythm of the house was to have Mass every morning. In the Episcopalians have Mass too. We had Mass in the little house chapel, and morning and evening prayers, and up at the church, and lots of meals throughout the week. So it was a wonderful sort of community living experience that got to mix with all kinds of great friends, both from the university, from the neighborhood, and from the streets. So that's just a little bit about the background of this book, a little bit about my background, and a little bit about the background of the talk that I'm going to be giving today. What else do I want to say? So just I'm the director now of the Center for Catholic Social Thought at the Church of the Assumption, a little initiative we started a couple of years ago. If you don't know us, look us up. We do courses and speakers and book studies and
newsletter
and news, yeah, little pamphlets, The Catholic Citizen. Yeah, like Mirla said, I married late, and I married a woman 9 years younger than me, so I have 5 small children. I'm 47, and so I feel like a very old dad chasing a 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10-year-old around the house, but I guess it keeps me young. My brother kids me because he had children at a normal age, and his kids are like grown now, and so he's like, I don't know how you do it, man. So, anything else about me? That's pretty good. That's a good place to start, and then we can have some time for questions. I'll err on the, I get sick of hearing myself talk, so I'll err on the short side. And if you've ever been to Assumption, you know that we major in brevity at the Assumption. And so I'll err on the short side, and then we can fill in the gaps with some conversation and questions, if that sounds good. So the chapter that I'm going to be talking about today is, in the book, it's called The Poor. On your sheet, on your handout, does everybody have a handout? It's called From Doing For to Being With, Rethinking the Good Samaritan. So one of the gentlemen that I got to know very well and ended up living with for many years, and who ended up being a very good friend of mine until his recent passing 3 or 4 years ago. His name was Concrete. That was his street name, of course. His real name was Anthony Graham. My second son's middle name is Anthony, named after this guy, Anthony. And but this was one of the first guys that I got to know, and he was sort of a known quantity on the streets of Durham. Everybody knew who Concrete was. He was known for being eccentric, and was an African American, about his mid-50s as I got to know him. And a good way to picture him is he's sort of like, imagine a cross between John the Baptist and a black pirate. So screw that around in your mind a little bit. And that's kind of what he looked like. He had long beard with dreads, often braided, and long hair. He just looked the part of kind of like the crazy homeless guy. And he's with us now in spirit, and he doesn't mind me saying these things. So he had embraced homelessness intentionally at one point in his life, probably about 10 years before I got to meet him. Now, this is back in 2005 or something like that. And there were a lot of different factors involved in that, but one of them was the way that he saw that money and possessions and power had a way of skewing the relationships that we have to one another. So he wanted to be on the bottom of that rather than on the top of that. It gave him a sort of a particular vantage on the world that allowed him to see things from sort of like a different perspective than other people had. Than other people did. So he lived outside. Most of the year in North Carolina, it's not that cold in the winter, so that wasn't that bad. But in the summer, man, is it hot. He was, as I slowly got to know him and then knew him very well until the end of his life, he was, and still to this day is, I might describe him as the most fully human being that I had ever met. But when I first got to know him, he wasn't easy to get to know. He was very used to people stereotyping him and all of the baggage that comes with the way that people approach someone that looks like and sounds like and lives like concrete, as you can imagine. When I first got to know him, he would sort of haze me, and was very cautious and would kind of do crazy talk. He would speak as if he were insane, to see if I was really interested in him or whether I was interested in something else. But over time, I came to see that actually the way that the things that he said, though certainly not the way that I would put them, had a sort of coherence to them, that he was actually making sense if you actually listened and would give him enough time to sort of train you into his own, what's the word that I'm looking for, dialect. The concrete dialect of English, right? So you're listening to me like, okay, these are all English words, but like I'm not sure how they go together, and then over time you sort of learn. So slowly we developed trust between us. Eventually he came to, he started off by asking if he could stay in my car on a cold night because he didn't want to burden me with staying in my apartment. And so I let him do it. And eventually he warmed up and he would stay in my apartment and stayed with me for a long time before we just did my own private apartment until things sort of ratcheted up and we ended up getting the hospitality house going, and he had his own room there and those sorts of things. But one day, so he was scrupulously sort of, I don't want to say communistic because that gives you the wrong impression, but he thought people should share what they had, and he shared what he had with everybody, and he expected that others would do the same with him. So he didn't mind panhandling you. He didn't mind asking for money, and he would, even though he was very well known to me by this point, he didn't mind asking me for money regularly. And so one day he asked me if I had any change, and I had just given him $20 twice the previous day, and I was a poor graduate student, so I didn't have too much. And so he came and asked me for money again, and I said, I was kind of like, I hemmed and hawed, and I was like, Crete, I just did $20 twice yesterday, and he kind of like patiently waited for me to come around, and I hemmed and hawed some more, and eventually he looked at me and said, man, I'm just trying to save your life. So the talk today is going to be about how do we understand what that means? How can Crete panhandling me save my life? And I want to do that by taking a look at the parable of the Good Samaritan and rereading the parable of the Good Samaritan. The Good Samaritan is found in Luke chapter 10, verses 25 through 37. You may all be very familiar with it. I imagine that you are. You've probably been hearing it your whole life. Someone asked Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" And Jesus tells the parable about the Jew that goes down from Jerusalem to Jericho and falls among robbers and gets beaten up and left for dead on the side of the road, and the Levite and the priest go by and move to the other side of the road, and eventually, and leave the guy there, and eventually the Samaritan comes by, right, and puts the man, binds up his wounds, puts the man on his animal, and takes him to the inn. So that's the parable of the Good Samaritan. The usual reading of this parable is, of course, what we all instinctively reach for, that Christians should serve the poor by helping them, right? It's just a simple tale to illustrate. It's something I would tell my kids, read in a book, right? A simple metaphor. And we enshrine this way of reading the parable in 1,000 different ways in our culture, right? And so we have Samaritan agencies, right? It's going to be Christmas time. Samaritan agencies are those who they collect gifts for the poor around Christmas time, and coats and things like that. And we even have Samaritan laws, right? Good Samaritan laws, so that if you screw something up while you're trying to help somebody, you can't get sued and stuff like that. So, because the Good Samaritan is the person who's always helping people, right? I'm a Good Samaritan. We aspire to be the Good Samaritan. But this it will not surprise you, is not the way that I think that we should understand the parable. I want to reread the parable. And one tip for why this might be is sort of where the Samaritan comes from and who the Samaritan is. Who is the Samaritan supposed to be in the parable? So the Samaritan comes where? From far away. From far off, the parable tells us. He comes to someone on the side of the road, a man who is half dead, it says. He takes oil and wine, it says, and pours them on the man. Think sacraments. Do we know anybody else who comes from far away to people who are half dead and brings them sacraments? And then he takes the person to an inn, right? Think church. And then he says, what? Don't worry, I'm coming back. So this is church. So the answer is obvious, right? The Samaritan is supposed to be Jesus. The Samaritan is Jesus. Not just any old good helper, but Jesus himself. So Jesus has told us not a simple moral tale for any 6-year-old. He has dramatized salvation and put himself at the center of it. Everybody with me so far? All right, jump in if I'm going too fast. But then that raises the question, if I'm not supposed to be the Good Samaritan in the parable, who am I supposed to be? Well, how did the parable start, and who is Jesus telling the parable to? To a Jew. And so who am I supposed to identify with? The Jew, right? I'm the man in the ditch who's half dead, because the Jews would identify with the Jew in the ditch. This, in other words, is the Lenten gospel, or maybe just the Christian gospel, right? I am not the one who does the saving. I'm the one who needs the saving. I am the one in the ditch. I am the one who's half dead. I am the one in terrible trouble. I'm the one in need of salvation. And who will bring it? Jesus, of course, right? But now here comes the twist, right? Who does Jesus identify with? Not just any old guy, but Jesus identifies with a Samaritan. Samaritans, as you might know just from your own familiarity with the New Testament and the Bible, were the sworn enemies of the Jews, right? They were their neighbors just to the north, and they were sort of considered half Jewish and half pagan. They were, if you were from Judea, the most despised people on the planet, sort of half human. And so we read in the scriptures, Jews do not associate with Samaritans. We hear at the parable of the story of the woman at the well, the author tells us. And when the Pharisees want to accuse Jesus of being out of his mind and want to rebuke him, they say, do you not have a demon, and are you not a Samaritan, right? So a Samaritan is like a curse word, right? This is the guy that you would never have a meal with. This is the guy that maybe you would help out of your own supreme goodness, but never someone that you would be helped by. To be helped by your hated enemy would be sort of, right, like the height of humiliation, to need help from your enemy. And Jesus says, by identifying himself with the Samaritan, Jesus says, this guy, your worst enemy, the Samaritan, is the one that you, the guy in the ditch, find your salvation in. You find your salvation in the one that you most despise. The person, maybe, that you've tried to avoid being your entire life. So Jesus is not just telling us a simple moral tale, but challenging us sort of to the heart of our being. Think about who those people are that you most despise, and now think about your salvation having to come from them. So, but where is the Samaritan today? One of the most obvious places is the guy flying the sign at the side of the road, the folks at the homeless shelter, or the folks in the tent cities. These are the outcasts. These are those we don't want to have anything to do with. These are the people we've tried to avoid being our whole lives. The mentally ill, the deviant, those we think of as dangerous, those we think of as less fortunate, those we label as marginal. The stinky guy who walks around, that's actually what I called Concrete for the first couple of months that I knew him, because I didn't know him, but man, did he stink. And so I just called him Stinky. Oh no, here comes Stinky. The panhandler, the guy that talks weird. This is, in our context, this is the Samaritan. This is Jesus. And Jesus says, this is God's salvation for us, those that we most despise as a culture, and sometimes as individuals, is where our salvation is coming from. We are, the parable says, we are those in the ditch. We are not the Good Samaritan. We are in the ditch. We need those that we most despise. So the basic reversal then, everybody with me so far? Okay, good. The basic reversal of the parable then is that we are not their helpers. We are not the benefactors of the poor. They are our helpers. They are our benefactors. And of course, that's hard to swallow, right? Why is that so hard? Well, obvious reasons, right? Everybody likes to be the do-gooder, right? It feels good. It's comfortable. You can get pats on the back and tax breaks for writing checks to Samaritan agencies, and you can do a lot of service to the poor, like without getting out of your chair, right? you can just write checks, and you can do it at a distance without ever seeing anybody, or doing it across the soup line. We can help the poor without changing our lives. And even more, helping the poor can, in a weird way, justify our own way of life and sort of status and level of income and things like that. Because if we are helping them become more nearly like us, then then there's no problem with the way that we are, right? But what if the goal is not to make the poor like us, but what if the goal that the gospel holds out to us is to make us more like concrete? What if it's we who are called to change? And this is what the parable is basically, I think, about. In other words, this is number 6 on the handout. The fundamental shift that the parable is trying to bring about is a shift from doing for to being with. We think about the poor, and we immediately think of doing things for them. We think about getting them food, getting them money, getting them shelter, things that they need, material objects usually, getting them signed up for this or that government program, or getting them mental health care, or whatever it is. But in fact, I think what the parable calls us to is a life with the poor, and this is what the Catholic worker movement dramatizes and has lived out so well in hospitality houses for the last 100 years. They have held out a model of living with the poor, and that was what was so attractive to me about coming across the Catholic worker movement. Dorothy, just a little pause here, just to introduce the Catholic worker movement if you don't know about it. Dorothy Day and Peter Marin started the Catholic worker movement in 1933 in response to the devastating poverty of the Great Depression in New York City. And there were 3 aspects to the movement. Discussions, roundtable discussions for the clarification of thought about social issues. There were communitarian farms where people could go back to the land and learn a reconnection with the land, which Peter and Dorothy thought was actually the getting away from the land was the root cause of all the poverty that had been around them. But at any rate, I digress. And then, but the most well-known part of the movement, and the part that has continued to be the most well-known part, and the most successful part, has been these hospitality houses where Catholics and Christians offer free hospitality to the poor, ideally with no strings attached, simply because you're a human being, not because you're a morally good person necessarily. And so this was the part of the movement that I really dug into and became involved in. And it's a model of the idea that that we need each other, and that especially we need the poor, because the poor are Jesus. So there are ways, we get back here now to number 6. So it's a shift away from thinking about doing for to being with or living with the poor. And why do we want to do that? Well, Scripture tells us unambiguously, right, that in the poor we receive Christ, inasmuch the Scripture portion that's quoted over and over again, inasmuch as you did it for one of the least of these poor, you did it to me, right? So the poor person is Christ. And so to be with the poor is just to be with Jesus, is to commune with God. And so a life of being with in a hospitality house, or if you take someone in your, into your home, or if you stop and talk to somebody on the side of the road, or if you have a meal with somebody, or whatever it is, this is communion. This is actually a foretaste of heaven. You know, this is an analogy to, it's not the same thing, so don't quote me, don't get me in trouble by getting the theology wrong. It's not the same thing as adoration, but it's something like adoration, right? Because what are we doing when we go to adoration? We're just sitting in the presence of God. And God is present there in the Eucharist, and God is present in a special way in the poor as well. So when we're seeking a life of being with the poor, we're doing it out of devotion, out of friendship to them, and out of a desire to be with the Lord. So, you know, being saved, our salvation just is being with Jesus, right? We talk about going to heaven, but that starts right now in a lot of ways, right? In receiving the Eucharist, in participating in worship. The life of heaven starts now, and one of the ways is God comes to us in the presence of the poor. Salvation is being present with and resting with God, and we can do that. We can do that in our encounters with the poor. Jesus says, you will always have the poor with you. This is the church that he's talking about. The church should always have the poor with you. That's just what he says. And that's because it's yet another way to encounter the Lord. Pope Francis said, I want a church of the poor. And so we've largely moved away from having the church, having the poor among us as friends and neighbors and companions and just as part of the body of Christ, and we've pushed them away with handouts, right? First you have to get to be more middle class like us, and then you can come and be here. But what Jesus holds out to us in this parable is a life with the poor, from doing for to being with. And so this is the first way that the Samaritan saves us. But there's also any number of other ways that being with enhances our salvation or moves us down that path, the path of discipleship. A life with the poor is sort of where salvation, so many parts of our salvation that otherwise don't get touched, get worked out on the ground. For one thing, we come face to face with the underbelly of our own middle class comforts, right? We live in a system in which we are the beneficiaries, but which has, for the last 200 years, since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, undeniably and systematically produced an underclass, right? And no amount of trying to re-rig the system has been able to do that, or to fix that. And so in the poor, we come face to face with the way that our way of life, or with what our way of life produces in the world. We can come to a sense of, how do I want to put this today? The relative ownership of what I have. In other words, if I come to a place of friendship with the poor, all of a sudden my claims on what is mine begin to take on a different shape, right? If I have real friends like concrete who are in my life, and there's a huge social and financial disparity between us, that calls into question how much of what I think is, or usually think of as mine, is actually mine, right? In the same way that you would do with any friend. You know, if you had friends or family members who were, who had vastly different financial circumstances than you did, and you were just going to kind of hold on to what you had and save it and make sure that you had what you needed for the future, well, there'd be something wrong. You recognize pretty soon that there'd be something wrong with that, right? Or if you had a child who was not so well off and you had plenty, you'd at least think about it, right? And so our friendship with the poor relativizes our own claims of private property, right? The church supports private property. There's no problem with that. But private property is always, in Catholic social teaching terms, indexed to the universal destination of goods, right? In other words, that what I have is not for me. What I have is for everyone and for others, and especially for the person who's right here in front of me. Being with the poor can also work on us in subtle ways that we might not expect. So one thing that is often a big issue with us is we have a fear of the poor and we have a fear of being poor. But we're often so enmeshed in our comforts that we don't realize that actually the motivation for a lot of what we do is this fear of the poor and fear of being poor. So fear of being poor keeps us, hedging our bets against being free with our finances and with our wealth. And fear of the poor themselves does the same thing because we want to keep a space between them. So anyways, the being with the poor works on all of these peculiarities that we have as comfortable middle-class people. It works on our obsession with comfort, financial security, success, our obsession with the future, as having to have enough resources in order to sort of get to the future, respectability, money, convenience, esteem, our own worries about the future, all of these things. If we're plopped down suddenly in the midst of people of very different means, all of a sudden those things can start to take on a different color for us. The Lord can use our relationships with the poor to whittle away on those kinds of hang-ups in very strange ways. We were made to be like Jesus Christ. And what does Jesus Christ look like in our present day and age? Well, a lot of the times, he looks like a cross between John the Baptist and John the Baptist and a black pirate. He is the one who is coming to us down the street on a bicycle, a little bit stinky, talking a little bit funny, but who we avoid. And I think the point of the parable of the Good Samaritan is that we are the ones in the ditch, and we've got to see what we can't do to receive him. How to start? This is challenging. Absolutely essential. Do it with others. Do it with others. The Gospels are addressed to communities, And if we take them as addressed to what we each have to do individually without friends or family or other people or church members, they're way too intimidating, right? But do this with others. I did this, as I tell in the book. The only reason that I've done that I have gotten involved in the Catholic worker movement, the only reason that I live the way that I live now is because it's so much fun, and the only reason I think it's so much fun is because I've gotten to do it with great friends and made the best friends that I've ever had in the midst of it. So this is not, please don't hear me today as saying this is something we need to do because it's just our duty and we have to grind our teeth and tough it out and pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. That is the last spirit that I want this to be done in the world. The adventure that the parable of the Good Samaritan calls us to is precisely that, an adventure. And it's something that we're called to do with our friends. And it's something that's going to be, that at least I have discovered, is the most exhilarating thing that I've done. The other thing, second point, is that there's no blueprint for what this looks like. Part of what our world does is says you can have interactions with those of the lower class, but you have to do it within these institutionalized parameters, because those parameters will be safe, and we know that those parameters will work. And part of what being with is being willing to go beyond and outside of those institutionalized parameters. Almost all of our interactions with the poor are institutionalized and so sanitized, and so not free interactions between simply two human beings, right? So there's no blueprint for how to do this. We'll have to start figuring it out as you go, and that's part of the fun of it. What else do we have to do before we die? Then be with friends and engage the world for the sake of the gospel. So get your heads together with your friends. This is baby steps for all of us, guys. I talk about this a lot in the book. The parable of the Good Samaritan holds out there a really high bar, right? But we don't get there all in one day. The Lord doesn't expect us to go from 0 to 60 in one day. The Lord expects us to take one foot and put it one step in front of the other one, or maybe a half a step. So what does that look like? Well, if you are not used to driving through areas, say on your way to work or way to the grocery store, in which you might encounter someone who is who is a Samaritan for you, or who might be a Samaritan for you. Remember now, the reversal of the parable. You're looking for your own salvation. Where is the Good Samaritan coming down the road? Then go through an area or go to a part of town where you might come across someone flying a sign on the side of the road. There's plenty in downtown St. Paul if you want to check that out. Start where you're comfortable. No, I shouldn't say that. Start where you're uncomfortable, but you can still do it. Give the guy $5. Start with $5 and pull over and have a conversation with him. Or if you're not comfortable with giving a guy $5, have a peanut butter jelly sandwich in your car and give the guy a peanut butter jelly sandwich and talk to him. So these are the kinds of baby steps. You don't have to invite somebody in your house tonight. That's probably not where most of us are. The Lord might have that as a goal for you, but that doesn't mean you're probably going to start there. The Lord's very gentle and forgiving, and he holds a very high bar, but none of us are going to get there in a day. The neighbor, the parable is about, the question that kicks it off is, who is my neighbor? And too quickly we jump to, well, everybody's my neighbor, right? Everybody in the world is my neighbor. That's not helpful. How is it helpful to say that everyone in the world is my neighbor? That doesn't tell me anything about what I should do. A neighbor, literally, the English word neighbor, means someone who you are close to, physically close to. Ne means close, and bor means like a person. So the first thing to do is put ourselves in physical, not virtual, physical proximity to others. And in the parable, it's the other who represents your salvation and my salvation in the Good Samaritan. And do other. You can do other things. You can read this book. Hey, what a good idea. But go read Dorothy Day and Peter Marn. There's lots of other books. This might serve as a good, first step. All right, I'm going to shut up soon. I promise. So this can be many things, but taking those first baby steps can also just be ways of having a breakthrough in your relationship with God. Because we do all kinds of things to try to cultivate our relationship with God. We go to talks on Wednesday mornings at church, right? We go on mission trips. We go dig wells in Africa. We read books. We go on retreats. We go on pilgrimages, flying all the way around the world, and then we come back and we're exhausted, and we still complain year after year to our spiritual director that I just can't seem to find Jesus. I just can't seem to find him. When maybe the obvious answer is, and the answer that this parable gives us is, Jesus is right there. He's right there on the street corner. You want to find him? You're just walking by him every day. And so that's the challenge to us. Jesus wants to find us in the parable. He wants to save us in the person that we can't imagine ever talking to. So, okay, let's stop there and let's have some conversation. I think we got 15 minutes or so for a little bit of Q&A maybe.
I'm old. I've heard this parable many times, but never the way you articulate it.
Yeah.
What do you think that is?
Can you repeat the question so we can record it?
Yeah. So the question is, why do you never hear this interpretation of the parable? Because very quickly the church got into, this is one answer, because very quickly the church got into a position of power in the world, and Christians became upper class as a rule. And so it became unthinkable to imagine ourselves being the person in the ditch. But one thing I didn't mention is that the way that I'm reading the parable now is I didn't come up with this. This is how the early church fathers, many of them, read this parable. St. Augustine, just to name one. So, we are the man in the ditch. Jesus is the Good Samaritan. Yeah.
Would you talk a little bit about, as we kind of think through how you presented the parable, but practically talk to the tension between living a family life, you have 5 children, And do you live in a hospitality house yourself?
Yeah, well, I live in a hospitality community, so we don't have any homeless people living in our home, but we have a hospitality house across our backyard.
Perfect. So could you talk to the tension between living with the poor and raising a family?
Yeah, great question. Yes, I find I wouldn't want my children to grow up any other way. So our setup up in Columbia Heights, and you're all welcome to come and join us for we have dinners on Friday nights and Monday nights if anybody ever wants to come up and see what it's really just a ma and pop's operation. It's nothing flashy. What I tell people is what it will seem like if you come up is having dinner with a bunch of rowdy children and in a bunch of noise and some people who just sort of get folded into the mix who were formerly homeless. That's what it'll seem like to you. It won't be any kind of mystical experience or anything like that. But I wouldn't want my kids to grow up any other way. And at the same time, there are differences between when I was doing this back in Durham, where the book is about, and the way that I do it now. I was single and footloose and fancy-free, and I could spend all the hours that I wanted to up at the church, doing whatever, talking to the guys and doing whatever. But in a way that's changed, so I can't spend all that time. It's in a way we get to know the guys as they come and live with us. So we have a hospitality house that has 3 or 4 formerly homeless people living in it at a time, and we sort of get to know the guys by living with them, rather than get to know them first at the church and then invite them to live with. So we have to sort of take a chance and say, oh, you seem like you might be a good fit for the house. Come and try it out. But at the same time, I have never had one worry. Make sure this is true. I have never had one worry about having children in an environment with formerly homeless people, in terms of like safety for the children or something like that. If anything, having children around the poor humanizes everyone, because they're kids. You can't act like an idiot as easily around kids. So anyways, there is a tension. There's less time to give, but so let me just give one more example, and then I'll let someone else. So on Sunday afternoons, often now, I'll take the kids over to the hospitality house, and we'll, if it's nice outside, we'll sit outside on the patio, or if it's winter, we'll go sit inside and we'll play cards. The kids will play cards. Whoever the residents are at the time will play cards with us, and it's just a wonderful mix of being with Jesus. Yeah.
What do you suggest for families that don't have a hospitality house across their backyard?
You can get one. No, seriously. I work at a church. We all know that doesn't pay too much, right? I don't know. I don't want for anything, but you don't have to be rich to start a hospitality house. You can ask your friends for some extra funds. You can spend less on yourself. This is just the challenge of the gospel, right? But to answer your question less facetiously, I think I would just suggest taking those baby steps that I was talking about. Maybe I kind of poked fun at serving food at Catholic Charities or something like that. But that can be a real first step. There's nothing wrong with starting there. I know that lots of people develop real relationships with guys that they see over the soup counter line. And so the Lord takes us right where we are. Like I say, keep some food in your car, stop and talk to somebody. But you approach it differently if you think this sandwich is really just a tool in order to have some conversation between with myself and someone I don't know yet, another human being. It's different than, oh, I really have to help this person because I'm the rich person. That's different. That's arm's lengthening. That's widening the gap between us. Rather, we have to do little things like that that start to shorten the gap. Yeah.
In reference to the person on the corner with the sign,
Yeah.
I always struggle with that. You pull up, you wonder what you should do, and then you don't do anything, and you pull away, which is what I generally do.
Yeah. Yeah.
This sinking feeling that should have done something, you know?
Yeah.
What's your answer to that? I mean, I still struggle with that all the time.
Yeah. So sorry.
I should look the other way.
Right.
I didn't make eye contact.
Yeah, right. Sorry, I haven't been repeating the question. The question is, what do you do when you pull up to the guy holding the sign on the side of the road? I say, give him money. I know that I am not the only opinion on this, and that lots of people say different things. But it's a simple Christian practice called almsgiving. It is not our job to control what that person does with what we give them. And it's actually a great practice for ourselves to relinquish control. Most of the time, the concern about what is the person going to do with this money is not a real concern at base, if we're honest with ourselves. It's not really a concern that I'm going to harm this person by giving them money because it will enable to buy them X, Y, or Z, right? I buy beer every week, right? There's nothing wrong with buying beer, even if the person does go and do that. Most of the time, the concern, the issue is, for me, and I have the same thing, most of the time for me, the same thoughts go through my head as you were mentioning. What if he does X, Y, or Z? Just about every time. What's he going to do with this? But if I'm honest with myself, that's a control problem that I have, right? This is my issue. This is not his issue. So that's what I would say. It's a practice, almsgiving in today's day and age, of institutionalized relationships between rich and poor. Almsgiving is a practice of what the Catholic social tradition calls personalism, of simply dealing with a person as a person, of deinstitutionalizing, decodifying, deregularizing our relationships, and just getting down to the relationship between two people.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, during the summer, we do have a group of people who come on the premises with signs,
Yeah.
asking for help, money, etc., etc.
Yeah.
We usually, the police has told us that that's organized crime,
Uh-huh.
and we advise our parishioners not to do that,
Uh-huh.
not to give them anything because it encourages them to continue to come.
Oh,
back.
yeah, uh-huh.
And so, but now you're talking about reaching out to people,
Uh-huh.
and so how do we balance knowing that it is organized crime versus a need?
So the question is, people coming onto the church property with signs asking for things and the police defining that as organized crime?
Yes, so there is there's a ring of people who comes from the south, come in, with the children, especially on hot days, summer days, as bait for, and it's always when people are leaving church.
Yeah, well, I mean, it would, so the question is then what is our response to that? And I guess I would have to know a lot more about the circumstances and what it means that that's organized crime. I would need more before I was comfortable giving an answer to what our response should be. Yeah.
Kind of related to that, and I really appreciate a lot of what you said, and particularly the relationship and also being challenged by the gospel, seeing it from this perspective.
Yeah.
What I struggle with and somebody back here asked the question of, do we give when we're on the corner? My biggest thing is, and I hear you about control, and there is some judgment on my part, but my biggest concern is, if you stand there, and I lived in Washington, D.C. and Philadelphia, and encountered a lot of people who were homeless and started talking to people, to your point. But one of the things I said, how is this going to change your situation? And I get that concrete wanted to be there, and I understand that some people choose their situation, but I don't see their situation changing long term or getting out of if they're truly homeless. How is that going to help standing on the corner day after day after day? Whereas if they get connected with Catholic Charities, which has a whole, and not perfect, I get it, but how does it help change the situation so they're less likely to be homeless? I mean, I love, you've got a house of hospitality and helping people move, but that's where I struggle is if I give to you when you're on the corner, but you're just setting up a situation where that becomes your job, or not addressing the other things. So hopefully that makes sense. Because how do you get to the long term so they don't need to be on the corner?
Yeah. So the question is, what about the guy on the corner? How does giving to him or her help them long term? What's their plan? What's the strategy for getting them off the street? I don't know. In some ways, I'm just a simple Bible-believing Christian. I don't have a social strategy. I hear what the Scripture is saying, and Jesus saying, "Give to those who beg." And so someone's on the corner, and I say, "I will give to you because you are begging. This is not going to hurt me." And there's a wonderful biblical tradition of, storing up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Remember that passage? Do you know how you get your treasures in heaven? Do you know how you make a deposit in the heavenly bank? The hand of a poor person, right? And so I also, I think it would be great if we had a society where we didn't have to have, where we didn't have as many poor that life was so hard for on the side of the road, and at the same time, the tradition is clearly that the poor we are always going to have with us. We're never going to end we're never going to end the panhandler almsgiving dynamic, right? And so I don't have to come up with a systematic account of how the whole system is going to work before I can do what the gospel calls me to do. I can simply respond to what the gospel calls me to do. Yeah.
Well, I know that our response as a Catholic church has been to set, to provide food shelves and to provide homeless, institutions and stuff, and we're always trying to come up with ideas that will help them. Is there something wrong with what we're doing?
It's a great question. Yeah, so the question is there something wrong with what we're doing in our Catholic charities, reliefs, our soup kitchens, our homeless shelters, things like that? No, there's nothing wrong with it, but it's a shame that we need it for the following reason. St. John Chrysostom, have you guys heard of St. John Chrysostom? His feast day is on September 13th or something like that. One of the greatest preachers in the church. In one of his homilies, they had a homeless person problem back in the Byzantine Empire when he was Archbishop of Constantinople himself. And so the city had, Byzantium, of course, then, had started setting up homeless shelters, municipal homeless shelters that were administered by the great Byzantine bureaucracy, right? And I'm aware that I'm talking a long time, and I'll be done soon. But Chrysostom, in a sermon, says, don't participate in the building of these homeless shelters. What? He's the Archbishop of Constantinople. How can he say such a thing? He said, if we do this, we will lose the habit of keeping a room and a bed in our house for the stranger that comes by and knocks on the door. We will lose, if the homeless shelters get normalized, even when he was talking in the 4th century, there was still this custom of having what was called a Christ room, a place for the poor person in Christian homes. And so he said, don't do this. Don't build these things. Rather, go out yourselves and bring them into your homes. And so we do have to have today, I don't know, have to might be a little bit strong. It's probably good that we have these things today, because otherwise it's Minnesota. We're going to have people dying of frostbite on the street, in January. But the call of the gospel is there. And we have to have those things because we are not willing. Because we're not willing to have Christ rooms anymore. And so, no, there's nothing wrong with those. But I think the challenge of the gospel, that's a hard challenge. That's a hard challenge. The challenge of the gospel is to take baby steps to move in that direction, I think. All right, I'm going to let that be the last question. And if there are more questions, I'm going to be over here if anybody wants me to sign their book, or we can chat more. Yeah?
I just want to say, this isn't a question, but I did a mission trip with a doctor from the Mayo Clinic as a medical mission in Honduras. And we took 16 teenagers. And just to back what you said, we always hear about seeing Christ in the poor. I never, ever understood that until I went on a mission trip. And those 16 teenagers did not want to come back to the U.S.
Yeah.
Because they saw the same thing. And
Yeah.
what was really meaningful, they had nothing,
Yeah.
but they gave everything they had.
Yeah. That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Thank you, guys.
Feel free to buy the book and give it to our friends as a Christmas gift. St. John Newman is going to have an opportunity to walk together with some pregnant mothers who have no support. And Horst is working on that and on that project. And this would be an opportunity for us to truly walk alongside someone who has no support. As Colin was talking, I was thinking, boy, does your project has so much meaning? Does it have meaning now? A lot of meaning, as we discussed it last night. So there will be several opportunities for us to walk alongside with people who are in need of goods, emotional needs, spiritual needs. So stay tuned for that, and we'll be talking about, we'll be organizing something, an opportunity for us. And I want to say that a few years ago, I went on a walk with Joe Keaton around the premises. And I was talking to him, and I said to him, I was thinking about, we're talking about poverty and how we, the effects, what happened during COVID, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, and I remember something came to mind. I remember that in the 1980s, Africa, food being sent to Africa because of the drought and people were dying. And I remember several artists came together for song and singing, raising money for that. And their plan was to erase hunger by the year 2000. So now we're in year 2025, right? And I asked myself, I ponder about that and I'm thinking, but why isn't poverty over? And it hit me because we are saved. They are there for our benefit. Indeed. They are there for our benefit. And listening to you talk, brought that back to mind. And so something to think about, that poverty for true is never gonna end. And we live here in the West, and we have to remember that those who are poor are there for our benefit, and how we're going to benefit from it. How we're going to encounter Christ through the poor. That's all. Thank you for coming. Please feel free to come in.